16. Dolly carried out her intention of going to see Anna. She was very sorry to grieve her sister and to do anything that was unpleasant to Levin. She felt that they were right in not wishing to have anything to do with Vronsky, but felt it her duty to visit Anna and show her that the altered circumstances could not change her own feelings toward her. Not to depend on the Levins for that journey, Dolly sent to the village to hire horses, but Levin, hearing of it, came and reproached her. "Why do you think your going would be unpleasant to me? Even if it were unpleasant, it would be still more unpleasant for me if you did not use my horses," he said. "You never told me definitely that you were going, and that you should hire horses in the village is, in the first place, unpleasant to me, and besides that, they will undertake the job but won't get you there. I have horses, and if you don't wish to grieve me, you will take them." Dolly had to agree, and on the appointed day Levin had 4 horses ready for his sister-in-law, as well as a relay, having made it up of farm and riding horses, not at all a handsome team, but one able to get her to her destination in a day. As horses were also required for the princess, who was leaving, and for the midwife, it was inconvenient to Levin. But he could not be so inhospitable as to allow Dolly to hire horses while staying with him. Besides, he knew that the 20 rubles she would have had to pay for the journey were of importance to her, and he felt her distressing financial embarrassments as if they had been his own. Acting on Levin's advice, Dolly started before daybreak. The road was good, the calash comfortable, the horses ran merrily, and on the box beside the coachman, instead of a footman, sat an office clerk, whom Levin sent with her for safety. Dolly dozed, and only woke up when approaching the inn where the horses were to be changed. After drinking tea at the prosperous peasant's house where Levin had stopped when on his way to Zviachki's, and conversing with the women about their children, and with the old man about Count Vronsky, of whom he spoke very highly, Dolly continued her journey at 10 o'clock. At home, her care of the children never gave her leisure to think. But now, during this 4 hours' drive, all the thoughts she had repressed crowded suddenly into her mind, and she reviewed her whole life from all sides as she had never done before. Her thoughts seemed strange to her. At first she thought of the children, about whom, though the princess and especially Kitty, she had greater faith in Kitty, had promised to look after them. She still felt anxious. If only Masha does not get into mischief again, or a horse does not kick Grisha, and if only Lily's digestion does not get more upset. But then questions of the present began to be replaced by those of the immediate future. She began thinking that she would have to move into another house in Moscow for the winter, have the drawing-room furniture recovered, and a new winter coat made for the eldest girl. Then came problems of a more remote future. How she should start her children in the world. With the girls, it will be comparatively easy, she thought. But how about the boys? At present I am teaching Grisha. That's only because I'm free now, and not having a baby. Of course Steve is not to be counted on, but with the help of kind people, I shall start them somehow. But in case of another child... And it occurred to her how inaccurate it is to say that woman's curse is the bringing forth of children. Travail, that's nothing, but pregnancy is torture, she thought, with her last pregnancy and the death of her infant in mind. And she recalled a talk she had had with a young woman at the halting place. In answer to the question whether she had any children, the good-looking young peasant wife had cheerfully replied, "I had one girl, but God released me. I buried her in Lent." "And are you very sorry?" asked Dolly. "What's there to be sorry about? The old man has plenty of grandchildren as it is. They're nothing but worry. You can't work or anything. They're nothing but a tie." This answer had seemed horrible to Dolly, despite the good-natured sweetness of the young woman's looks. But now she could not help recalling it. In those cynical words there was some truth. Altogether, she thought, looking back at the whole of her life during those 15 years of wedlock, pregnancy, sickness, dullness of mind, indifference to everything, and above all, disfigurement. Even Kitty, young pretty Kitty, how much plainer she has become. And I, when I am pregnant, become hideous, I know. Travail, suffering, monstrous suffering, and that final moment. Then nursing, sleepless nights, and that awful pain. Dolly shuddered at the mere thought of the pain she had endured from sore nipples, from which she had suffered with almost every baby. Then the children's illnesses, that continued anxiety. Then their education, nasty tendencies. She recalled little Masha's delinquency among the raspberry canes. Lessons, Latin. It is also incomprehensible and difficult. And above all, the death of these children. And once more the cruel memory rose that always weighed on her mother heart. The death of her last baby, a boy who died of croup. His funeral, the general indifference shown to the little pink coffin, and her own heart-rending, lonely grief at the sight of that pale little forehead with the curly locks on the temples, and of the open, surprised little mouth, visible in the coffin, at the instant before they covered it with the pink lid, ornamented with a gold lace cross. And what is it all for? What will come of it all? I myself, without having a moment's peace, now pregnant, now nursing, always cross and grumbling, tormenting myself and others, repulsive to my husband. I shall live my life and produce unfortunate, badly brought up and beggar children. Even now, if we had not spent this summer with Kostya and Kitty, I don't know how we should have managed. Of course, Kostya and Kitty are so considerate that we don't feel it, but it can't go on so. They will have children of their own and won't be able to help us. As it is, they are put to inconvenience. It's Papa, who's kept scarcely anything for himself, to help us. So I can't even give the children the start myself, unless it's with other people's help and with humiliation. Well, supposing the best, that none of the other children die, and that I somehow succeed in bringing them up. At the very best, they will only escape being ne'er-do-wells. That's all I can hope for. And for this, so much suffering and trouble. My whole life ruined. Again she remembered what the young woman had said. Again the recollection was repulsive to her, but she could not help admitting that there was a measure of crude truth in the words. "Is it much further, Michael?" she asked the clerk, to dispel the thoughts that frightened her. "They say it's 7 versts from this village." The calash was descending the village street to a small bridge. A crowd of merry peasant women, with ready twisted sheaf-binders hanging from their shoulders, were crossing the bridge, chattering loudly and merrily. The women stopped on the bridge, inquisitively scrutinizing the calash. All the faces turned toward her seemed to Dolly to be healthy and bright, mocking her with their joy in life. Everybody lives, everybody enjoys living, Dolly continued her reflections when, after passing the peasant women and having reached the top of the incline, they were going at a trot, the old calash comfortably swaying on its soft springs. And I, released as from a prison, from the world that is killing me with its worries, have only now collected my thoughts for a moment. Everybody lives. These women, and my sister Natalie, and Varenka, and Anna to whom I am going. Only not I. And they are all down on Anna. What for? Am I better than she? I at least have a husband whom I love. Not as I wish to love, but still I do love him. But Anna did not love hers. In what is she to blame? She wishes to live. God has implanted that need in our souls. It is quite possible I might have done the same. I don't even know whether I did well to listen to her at that terrible time when she came to me in Moscow. I ought then to have left my husband and begun life anew. I might have loved and been loved, the real way. And is it better now? I don't respect him. I need him, she thought of her husband, and I put up with him. Is that any better? I was still attractive then, still had my good looks, she went on, feeling that she wanted to see herself in a glass. She had a small travelling looking-glass in her bag, and felt inclined to take it out. But glancing at the backs of the coachman and the clerk, who sat swaying beside him, she knew she would feel ashamed if one of them chanced to look round, and she did not take it out. Yet even without looking in the glass, she thought it might not be too late even now. She remembered Kosnichev, who was particularly amiable to her. Stiva's friend, the good-natured Turufzin, who had helped her nurse her children when they had scarlet fever, and who was in love with her. And then there was a very young man who considered, so her husband told her as a joke, that she was the handsomest of the three sisters. And the most passionate and impossible romances occurred to Dolly's fancy. Anna has acted excellently, and I, at any rate, shall not reproach her at all. She's happy, she's making another happy, and is not dragged down as I am. But she's no doubt as fresh, clever, and frank as ever, she thought, and a roguish smile puckered her lips, chiefly because while thinking of Anna's romance, she invented an almost similar romance for herself, with an imaginary collective man who was in love with her. Like Anna, she confessed everything to her husband, and Oblonsky's surprise and embarrassment at the announcement made her smile. Wrapped in such dreams, she reached a turning from the high road, which led to Vozdivshanks. "17. The coachman stopped the horses and looked round toward a field of rye on the right, where some peasants sat beside a cart. The clerk wished to get down, but then, changing his mind, shouted authoritatively and beckoned to a peasant. The breeze, which they had felt while driving, died down when they stopped, and horse flies settled on the sweating horses, which angrily tried to brush them off. The metallic sound of a scythe being hammered beside the cart ceased, and one of the peasants rose and came toward the calash. "Look at him, stuck fast," shouted the clerk angrily at the peasant, who was slowly stepping with bare feet over the ruts of the dry, hard-trodden road. "Be quick!" The curly-headed old man, with a piece of bast tied round his head, his rounded back dark with perspiration, increased his speed, approaching the calash, and put his sunburnt arm on the mudguard. "Vozdivshansk? The squire's horse? To the count's?" he repeated. "There. When you've passed that bend, turn to the left, and go right down the drive, and you'll knock up straight against it." "But whom do you want? The squire?" "Are they at home, my good man?" said Dolly vaguely, not knowing how to speak of Anna even to a peasant. "I expect so," said the peasant, shifting from one bare foot to the other, leaving in the dust a clear imprint of it with its 5 toes. "I expect so," he repeated, evidently desiring a talk. "More visitors arrived yesterday." "Visitors? Just awful." "What do you want?" He turned toward a lad beside the cart who was shouting something. "Quite right. A while ago they passed by here on horseback to see the reaper. Now they must be at home again. And who may you be?" "We have come a long way," replied the coachman, climbing back onto the box. "And you say it's not far?" "I tell you, it's just there, where you come out." And he went on, rubbing his hand along the mudguard of the calash. A young, healthy-looking, thick-set lad also came up. "Could I get a job harvesting?" he asked. "I don't know, my lad." "There, you see, when you've turned to the left, you'll knock straight up against it," said the peasant, evidently unwilling to let them go, and wishing to talk. The coachman started, but hardly had they gone round the corner when the peasants called out to them. "Stop, friend, stop!" shouted 2 voices. The coachman pulled up. "They're coming. Here they are themselves," cried the man, pointing to 4 persons on horseback, and 2 in a charabanc coming along the road. It was Vronsky with his jockey, Veslovsky and Anna on horseback, and Princess Barbara with Sviatchky in the charabanc. They'd been for a ride, and to see some newly arrived reaping machines in operation. When the calash pulled up, the riders advanced at foot pace. Anna rode in front beside Veslovsky. She rode quietly on a small, sturdy English cob with a close-cropped mane and short tail. Dolly was struck by the beauty of her head. With locks of black hair, which had escaped under her top hat, her full shoulders and fine waist in the black riding habit, and her whole quiet, graceful bearing. For a moment, she thought it improper for Anna to be riding on horseback. In Dolly's mind, the idea of horse riding for women was connected with youthful coquetry, which in her opinion was unsuitable to a woman in Anna's position. but when she saw her closer, she at once became reconciled to Anna's riding. Despite her elegance, everything about Anna, her bearing, clothes and movements, was so simple, quiet and dignified that nothing could seem more natural. At Anna's side, on a heated bay cavalry horse, stretching out his fat legs and evidently admiring himself, rode Vasenka Veslovsky, wearing the Scotch bonnet with waving ribbons, and Dolly could not repress a merry smile on recognizing him. Behind them rode Vronsky. He was on a thoroughbred dark bay, which was obviously heated by galloping, and he was using the reins to hold it in. Behind him rode a short man dressed as a jockey. Sviatchky and the Princess Barbara in a new charabanc, to which was harnessed a tall trotter, were overtaking the riders. Anna's face immediately brightened into a joyful smile when she recognized Dolly in the little figure, pressed back in a corner of the old calash. She gave an exclamation, started in her saddle, and touched her horse into a gallop. Riding up to the calash, she jumped unaided from the horse, and, holding up her habit, ran toward Dolly. "It's what I thought, but dared not expect. What a pleasure! You can imagine how delighted I am," she cried, now pressing her face to Dolly's and kissing her, now leaning back to gaze smilingly at her. "What joy, Alexis," she said, turning to Vronsky, who had dismounted and was walking toward them. Vronsky, taking off his grey top hat, approached Dolly. "You can have no idea how pleased we are that you have come," he said, putting peculiar emphasis into his words, while a smile exposed his strong white teeth. Vasenka Veslovsky, without dismounting, raised his cap and welcomed the visitor, joyously waving his ribbons above his head. "That is the Princess Barbara," Anna said, in answer to Dolly's glance of inquiry when the charabanc came near. "Oh," said Dolly, and her face involuntarily expressed displeasure. The Princess Barbara was her husband's aunt. She had long known her and did not respect her. She knew that the Princess Barbara had all her life been a hanger-on to various rich relatives, but that she, a relation of Dolly's husband, should now be living in the house of Vronsky, a perfect stranger to her, offended Dolly. Anna noticed Dolly's expression, became confused, blushed, let her habit slip out of her hands, and stumbled over it. Dolly walked up to the charabanc and coldly greeted Princess Barbara. She was acquainted with Sviatchky too. He asked how his friend the crank was getting on with his young wife, and having glanced at the ill-matched horses and the patched mudguard of the calash, offered the ladies seats in the charabanc. "I will go in that vehicle," he said. "My horse is a quiet one, and the princess drives splendidly." "No, stay as you are," said Anna, who had also come up, "and we too will go in the calash." And giving Dolly her arm, she led her away. Dolly was dazzled by the elegant equipage of a kind she had never seen, by the beautiful horses and the elegant, brilliant persons about her. But what struck her most was the change that had taken place in Anna, whom she knew and loved. Another woman less observant, who had not known Anna before, especially one who had not thought the thoughts that were in Dolly's mind on the way, would not have noticed anything peculiar in Anna. But now Dolly was struck by that temporary beauty which only comes to women in moments of love, and which she now found in Anna's face. Everything in that face, the definiteness of the dimples on cheeks and chin, the curve of her lips, the smile that seemed to flutter around her face, the light in her eyes, the grace and swiftness of her movements, the fullness of her voice, even the manner in which she replied, half crossly, half kindly, to Veslovsky, who asked permission to ride her cob, that he might teach it to lead with the right leg when galloping. Everything about her was peculiarly attractive, and she seemed to know it, and to be glad of it. When the two women took their seats in the calash, both were received with shyness. Anna was abashed by the attentively inquiring look Dolly bent upon her. Dolly, after Sviatchky's remark about the vehicle, felt involuntarily ashamed of the ramshackle old calash in which Anna had taken a seat beside her. Philip the coachman and the clerk shared that feeling. The clerk, to hide his embarrassment, bustled about, helping the ladies in, but Philip became morose, and made up his mind not to be imposed upon by this external superiority. He smiled ironically as he glanced at the raven trotter of the charabanc, deciding that horse was good for nothing but a promenade. and could not do its 40 versts on a hot day at one go. The peasants beside the cart all got up and looked with merry curiosity at the visitor, making their own comments. "Glad they are. Have not met for a long time," said the curly-haired old man, with a piece of bast tied round his head. "There now, Uncle Gerasim, that raven gelding would cart the sheaves in no time." "Just look, is that a woman in breeches?" cried one, pointing to Vasenka Veslovsky, who was getting into the side saddle. "No, it's a man. See how easily he jumped up. I say, lads, it seems we are not to have a sleep." "What chance of a sleep today?" said the old man, blinking at the sun. "It's too late. Take your scythes, and let's get to work." 18. Anna was looking at Dolly's thin, wan face with its dust-filled wrinkles, and wishing to tell her just what she thought, that Dolly looked thinner and worse. But remembering that her own looks had improved, and that Dolly's eyes had told her so, she sighed and began talking about herself. "You are looking at me," she said, "and wondering whether I can be happy, placed as I am. Well, what do you think? I'm ashamed to confess it, but I am unforgivably happy. Something magical has happened to me, like a dream when one feels frightened and creepy, and suddenly wakes up to the knowledge that no such terrors exist. I've wakened up. I have lived through sufferings and terrors, but for a long time past, especially since we came here, I've been happy," she said, looking at Dolly timidly and with a questioning smile. "I'm so glad," answered Dolly, smiling, but in a colder tone than she intended. "I'm very glad for your sake. Why did you not write to me?" "Why? Because I did not dare. You forget my position." "To me? You dared not? If only you knew how I consider—" Dolly wanted to tell Anna what she had been thinking that morning, but for some reason it now seemed out of place. "However, we will talk about all that later. What is this? What are all those buildings? Quite a town," she asked, to change the subject, pointing to the red and green roofs visible above a living green wall of acacias and lilacs. But Anna did not answer her. No, what view do you take of my position? What do you think?" "What?" she asked. "I imagine," Dolly began, but at that moment Vasenka Veslovsky, who had got the cob to lead with the right foot, galloped past in his short jacket, bumping heavily on the leathers of the side saddle. "It goes all right, Anna Arkadyevna," he shouted. Anna did not even glance at him, but it still seemed to Dolly out of place to begin to discuss this big subject in the calash, so she briefly replied, "I don't take any view. I always loved you, and if one loves the whole person as he or she is, and not as one might wish them to be." Anna, turning her eyes away from her friend and screwing them up, this was a new habit of hers and unfamiliar to Dolly, grew thoughtful, trying thoroughly to grasp the meaning of the remark. Having evidently understood it in the sense she wished, she glanced at Dolly. "If you had any sins," she said, "they would all be forgiven you for coming here and for those words." And Dolly noticed that tears had started to her eyes. She silently pressed Anna's hand. "But what are those buildings? What a lot of them there are," said she after a moment's silence, repeating her question. "They are the employees' houses, the stud farm, and the stables," answered Anna. "And here the park begins. Everything had been neglected, but Alexis has had it all renovated. He's very fond of this estate, and, a thing I never expected of him, he's quite enthusiastic in managing the place. But of course his is such a talented nature. Whatever he takes up he does splendidly. He's not only not bored, but passionately engrossed in his occupations. He's grown into a first-rate, prudent landlord, as I recognize. In farming matters he's even stingy, but only in farming. Where it is a question of thousands, he does not count them," she said, with that joyous, sly smile with which women often speak of the secret characteristics, discovered by them alone, of the man they love. "Do you see that big building? It is the new hospital. I think it will cost more than 100,000 rubles. That is his hobby just now. And do you know why he started it?" The peasants asked him to let them some meadows at a reduced rent, I think, and he refused, and I reproached him with being stingy. Of course it was not that alone, but one thing with another caused him to start that hospital, to show, that he's not stingy. It is pettiness, if you like, but I love him the better for it. And now you will see the house in a moment. It was his grandfather's, and it has not been altered at all on the outside. How fine, said Dolly, looking with involuntary surprise at a handsome house with a row of columns standing out among the variously tinted foliage of the old trees in the garden. It is fine, is it not? And from upstairs the view is wonderful. They drove into a gravelled courtyard surrounded by flowers, where two men were making a border of rough, porous stones round a well-forked flower bed, and stopped beneath a roofed portico. Ah, they've already arrived, said Anna, looking at the horses that were being led away from the front door. Don't you think that one is a beautiful horse? It is a cob, my favourite. Bring it here and get me some sugar. Where is the Count? She asked the two elegant footmen who had rushed out. Ah, there he is, she went on, seeing Vronsky and Veslovsky coming out to meet her. In which room are you putting the princess? Vronsky asked in French, addressing Anna, and without waiting for her answer, he once more welcomed Dolly, and this time he kissed her hand. The large room with the balcony, I should think. Ah, no, that's too far off. The corner room will be better. We shall see more of one another there. Well, let's go in, said Anna, who had given her favourite horse the sugar the footman had brought. And you forget your duty, said she to Veslovsky, who was also standing in the portico. Pardon me, my pockets are full of it, he answered with a smile, plunging his fingers into his waistcoat pocket. But you have come too late, she said, wiping with her handkerchief the hand which the horse had wetted as it took the sugar. Anna turned to Dolly. How long can you stay? Only a day. That's impossible. I have promised. And the children, answered Dolly, feeling embarrassed because she had to get her bag out of the calash and because she knew her face was covered with dust. No, Dolly, darling. Well, we will see. Come along. And Anna led the way to Dolly's room. It was not the grand room that Vronsky had suggested, but one for which Anna apologized to Dolly. And this room, needing an apology, was full of luxuries, such as Dolly had never lived among, which reminded her of the best hotels abroad. Well, dearest, how happy I am, said Anna, who in her riding habit had sat down for a moment beside Dolly. Tell me about yourselves. I meet Stiva in passing, but he can't tell me about the children. How's my pet Tanya? Grown a big girl, I suppose? Yes, quite big, answered Dolly shortly, and was herself surprised that she could talk so coldly about her children. We are very comfortable at the Levenses, she added. There now, had I only known that you don't despise me, said Anna, you should all have come to us. You know Steve and Alexis are old and great friends, she added, and suddenly blushed. Yes, but we are so comfortable, answered Dolly with embarrassment. However, my joy makes me talk nonsense. But really, dear, I'm so glad to see you, said Anna, kissing her again. You've not yet told me how and what you think about me, and I want to know everything. But I am glad that you will see me just as I am. Above all, I don't want you to think that I wish to prove anything. I don't want to prove anything. Simply I wish to live, not hurting anyone but myself. I have a right to do that, have I not? However, that needs a long talk, and we will talk it all well over later. Now I will go and dress, and send you the maid.